Hello and welcome. Today is Wednesday, so once again it is our lovely Wellness Wednesday webcast, and today we have the lovely Jess from Waste Not, and she will be speaking about rescuing surplus fruit and veg and why it is so important. Now Jess, over to you.
Hello everyone, I'm Jess. I run Waste Not, and we rescue surplus and misshapen fruit and vegetables directly from farms, working with growers all over the country. And we've been working with RA for over a year now, and just getting to know what RA likes, what their clients like, what the chefs like, and working as closely with them as possible to do as much good as possible.
Wonderful. So, Jess, so you do a lot of surplus veg rescue, don't you? And I'm sure that there's much more you can tell us about the rescuing of said fruits and veg, and a little bit more about the company.
So we, like I said, we work directly with farmers. We set up about 5 years ago to supply catering and hospitality trades to attack the problem that was existing in terms of there being so much surplus being sent to landfill, anaerobic digestion, and other outlets that just weren't tummies, basically. So we forged relationships with our farmers, and we worked really closely with chefs to make sure that we could tie the two together, so that no good fruit or veg was wasted. We also work with charities, so we make sure that we have surplus that is put aside for charities so that we can fulfill their needs as well. And obviously over the last few months that those needs have increased dramatically. There's a couple of slides later on that will go to show what we've been doing over the past few months in terms of volumes, how we've been doing it, and generally the ways that we've been working, the ways that we've adapted, and yeah, just continuing to fight the good fight.
Jess, I've just got a quick question just to kick off. What was it like when you were starting out right at the beginning, and kind of how was your approach perceived by not just suppliers but also kind of the on-trade? How did people react when you start telling them that you're going to kind of try to save all these misshapen fruit and veg?
Well, the reaction, so Waste Not was born from the reaction, pretty much. So I had close relationships with farmers and chefs from my previous job, and having seen that there was such an existing problem and knowing that there was such a strong will to do something about it, I put into place movements to tackle the problem. So from that side, it was really positive. There was just so much impetus and goodwill to do the right thing from both sides, and it took a massive leap of faith from a lot of players, because it was sort of the first of its kind to be doing this. So we needed to make sure that everyone was on the same page, that we were making sure that the conversations were happening, relationships were developed, the logistics were in place, and just generally making sure that everyone was going to benefit and win from what we were trying to do. At the same time, it's a commercial business, so we needed the commercial side of it to come through as well, and making sure that a key message of what we say is that just because the produce hasn't got a commercial value at the time, that it's still got value and it's still valuable. And we need to make sure that people realize that it's taken the farmer as much time, effort, money to grow as much of its commercial counterpart, which has that value. So getting that across was, I would say, the biggest challenge. It's been sometimes difficult getting that message across, but we've got there, and I think at the end of the day, and I think especially after these few months, people have really reassessed what matters, and I'm hoping that as we move forward, those priorities will remain.
Yeah, fantastic. I think we've all seen a huge shift, haven't we? And not to throw you under the bus here, but in terms of, you know, the stats that are being kind of bounded around by Fair Share and all the kind of, you know, the charities that are doing amazing work at repurposing food, what was the kind of the headline fact that scared you into kind of, you know, developing the business and pursuing this kind of path?
Well, I think so. We were sort of ahead of the curve with the publicizing of the issue. I think it's been such a problem for so long, but it comes under the title of it's just one of those things. It's just the way things are done, and therefore you don't really think about challenging it or changing the way that it's done. Whereas we come along and we're sort of challenging how processes have been for decades, and usually those processes are in place to benefit big conglomerates. And don't get me wrong, I know, you know, money makes the world go round, and ultimately financial incentive is usually the bottom line that drives decisions. However, we want to change it and say you can do good as well as have a successful business as well if you just think about different ways of doing things. And changing that mentality is really what was key to forging success with Waste Not.
So, I mean, it sounds like you were a massive disruptor then, and kind of, I suppose with that comes a lot of challenges, but also opportunities to kind of make real change. And I suppose just from a kind of perspective of how you work with us and your suppliers, could you just talk us through the process of how it works? And I think we've got a slide for you, but just in a bit more detail, and from the kind of the growth to the plate, how that all comes together.
Yeah, of course. So we work along sort of the traditional lines, but the main difference probably is that the farmer is in much more closer contact with us and the chefs. So we are the connection between the farmers and the chefs to make sure that they can grow what they need, as well as be able to provide a level of service in terms of to their already existing contracts. So that's why, with everything that's going on in terms of the hospitality and the catering trade taking a nosedive with COVID, to be able to use that produce that would otherwise have gone to caterers, we've got an outlet for it towards Fair Share by having those relationships already in place and those connections, knowing what the farm is growing, knowing how to source it and how to get it to the right places. So it's the same sort of growing process. It's just making use of the relationships that I already had beforehand and making that connection.
Amazing. I think we've just had a slight technical difficulty with the slide there, so sorry about that, Jess. The internet seems to be slightly unstable today. This is the problem with live TV, right? Just next, I mean, you know, you talked about how they harvest and the delivery. I mean, is it a major sort of task to re-educate the chefs and everybody else into using the surplus fruit and veg and actually, you know, using the sustainability, but also the seasonal varieties?
I think a lot of the chefs have got to the point where they miss having produce limitations almost. That's certainly what's come out of conversations that I've been having, and the whole conversation around seasonality allows for us to discuss the benefits of being able to live in a country and grow produce, supporting the UK agricultural industry, but having those parameters in place, which means that they are limited in terms of what's available when. But I think that adds to the innovation and the challenge side of what we offer. And in terms of what we offer throughout the seasons, obviously with the durability of certain produce, it allows for other, we can't really do berries, for example, because the period of time in which you know that it's surplus to organize to get it to somewhere else, it's quite a short time window. So by nature, produce such as that doesn't lend itself to what we do easily. However, we are looking into working with a farm that has surplus berries and getting them frozen on site, or getting them pureed on site, or something like that, which prolongs their life, which we can then add to our list of what we have available for the chefs. But in terms of educating, I think that it's clear that there is a gap in skills within hospitality, but I think what it comes down to is getting the clear message across that we need to get back to basics of how we used to work. So we always say we're farmer led. So in terms of thinking, right, I want to cook this dish, I'm going to need to source this, and this from my wholesaler or my farmer. We say, right, look at what the farmer has available and then work backwards from that, because that way you're working with nature, and just from a much more automatic basis. You're thinking, well, what's available? I can make this from that. And I think that's what we stand for above anything else. It's working with nature. So it's working with what the elements have allowed to grow and what is available at that time of year. So yeah, I think with the re-education, or the education to start with, it needs to be very much fundamental ideas like that. It's not really complicated to sort of get your head around.
And Jess, you mentioned before that you kind of do a lot of work with schools, and particularly kind of environmental health initiatives to try and kind of promote, the change in mentality around food waste in general, but also obviously misshape and veg and fruit. Can you just touch on that a little bit more in terms of kind of what the perception has been when you go into schools, and what the reaction of kids is and things like that?
Yeah, so we part of the education side and the charity side are probably what I'm most proud of, because I feel like that's where what we do is really having an impact. With the education side, the produce goes in its natural muddy format, spreading mud everywhere, which is great. And they take it into classrooms. They learn about food waste, the journey to get to where we are growing our own food, the environmental issues which we face, the whole conversations around everything we're doing. And then it goes into their canteens and it's processed into food that they can eat. And then the conversation is continued when the children are making the decisions as to what they choose to eat. And if they can make responsible choices and get added to their 5 a day, then it's putting them in a position of control. And I think a lot of what we talk about in terms of sustainable issues is a lot of the greenwashing almost feels very out of reach as an individual. And I think to be able to put such an enormous issue on a plate in front of someone and say, well, you've contributed to helping tackle that issue, it can really empower people. And I think that's the feedback we get a lot from chefs as well as individuals, is that sometimes the sustainability and the state of the planet can really seem all-consuming and just insurmountable. And I think with what we're doing, it can feel like you're doing your part, even if it feels quite small. You are doing you're making a difference.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you touched on it earlier, but do you think now it's even more important to eat locally and to kind of, you know, we've seen on the high street there's going to be a lot of changes in terms of how kind of restaurants, chefs pull their menus together, wine lists are going to get smaller and smaller, and in general kind of, you know, the excess that we've experienced, particularly across the food and beverage industry for a while now, is going to be a lot more constrained solely because you know, there are going to be limits on produce, but also people are going to be more conscious of you know, when they go out and how they spend their money and what they want to eat and drink. So what kind of changes do you think that's going to have, and do you think that kind of the sustainable approach and, you know, the focus on food waste will have a positive impact on your business and similar types of businesses?
So firstly, from the restaurant point of view, I think that with the availability of produce, the importance of it being local and seasonal is such that it by nature then automatically reduces the choices. I mean, we've all seen those menus that, you know, are 15 pages long and you've got to the back by the time your dinner's over. But I think with everything that's going on, everyone is ready for a bit of a back to basics kind of mentality. That's certainly the feedback I've been getting. And I think with menus, and I've worked with restaurants and chefs for like 15 years probably now, and I think that it's always the restaurants that have the shorter, more thought out, more flexible menus, which go on to have a bit more connection with suppliers and the customers, because they're offering their skills alongside good food, but as well as a really well put together menu which is reacting to nature. For example, we have from the start, Phil Howard has been really shouting about us and waving his pom-poms from the beginning about Waste Not, and he put on a menu at his restaurant at Elliston Street, and it's called the Little Sprouts menu, and it was one choice per course of our produce. So there was no choice. You just had that menu, starter, main, dessert, and it was all our produce. And I think that really just goes to show that you let the food talk. You trust in the chef's ability and the quality of the food, and you let that talk. So I think you're relying on both things, your chefs and your sourcing, to enable you to be able to limit your menus. And really, if you're not trusting your chef or sourcing right, that poses questions for itself. And I think from an individual point of view, in terms of sourcing locally, you know, I think with all the problems that we had with the supermarkets going into the pandemic, it's opened people's eyes to go to greengrocers, talk to people who are actually in the industry, who know about produce, and who also have, and not even as a, you know, oh look, we're sourcing quirky carrots. They just have carrots. There's no reference to them being any different to any other carrots, and that's how we should be moving on. So yeah.
Nice, fantastic.
That's amazing. I mean, so sorry, James, you go.
No, Steph, go. Sorry.
No, I was just going to say that it's very much about the chefs being creative with the produce that is seasonal and really thinking out their menus rather than going, I want to do this menu, and then making the produce fit. It's the other way around. I really love that. And we can do so much of that at home too.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's you know, there's so much out there now where you know what you're getting in, and you can adapt that way rather than having a recipe and develop it that way. There are so many tools, and I think we've all been given time, you know, over this period. Like, the gift of time has been one of the best things, where you can really think about food. And I think one of those things is that that's not going to go away. I think people have really realized that the whole importance of food, not only nutritionally but from a well-being perspective, it's so important to really bring that into your social family world, and to really put so much importance onto where you're getting your food from, and to appreciate that it's not just food. There's so much surrounding the importance of food, be it emotional, mental, social, supporting economies that really do need everyone's support behind them. And I think a lot of time maybe went into thinking about things like that, which is great.
That's amazing. We just got a slide up here, and I think it's just discussing what you guys have been up to over the last few months in focus. And one of the things that I just kind of sparked a thought there was around, there's been a lot of messaging in the press around the lack of kind of skilled labour to assist with harvesting crops and things like that. And how do you think that's going to affect us all moving forward? And do we all need to get a bit better at our gardening?
There's always room for getting better at gardening. But I would say, so the farms I've worked with haven't had any issues with labouring. So I'm just going to put that out there to start with. But the difference with the farms that we're working with, to a degree, is that by enabling the sourcing of surplus from the farms, they have been able to keep their seasonal workers all year round. So from a social perspective, Waste Not has sort of really supported those people who would have been out of work for that period of time, which is great. So I think going forward, I don't want to get into Brexit and stuff, but it is going to be an issue. I think maybe, but I think only within certain types of agriculture. And there's a big conversation around big agriculture, which we will be here for another hour if I start on that route, so I won't. In terms of the farms that we work with, along with them being environmentally friendly, they're very moral, ethical, socially friendly as well. They look after their staff. They operate in all sorts of cuddly, cozy ways. So that's great. So they've been fine for labour, and thank God, because otherwise there wouldn't have been anyone there to pick the produce for fair share.
Oh, that's brilliant to hear. Really, really good. And Jess, just one from me personally. If you had to choose one of these sort of supermarkets, just say, you can't get to a greengrocer or there isn't one in your area per se, what would be your pick for a sort of sustainable one that actually does a lot of work for rescuing all the fruit and veg?
Oh, that's tough.
I know, I'm sorry.
That is a curveball right there. Right.
All brands are available.
Yeah, all other brands are available. Just going to say that. M&S have a really, really great sustainability plan in place, and as far as I know, that's working really well. Yeah, I'm not totally sure, to be honest, and I don't want to say anything that isn't factually correct. Mind you, I'm probably saying lots of stuff that's not factually correct, so I was not sure why I'm worried now. But I think probably M&S first, and then Waitrose. Waitrose have I just know from their drive towards sustainable practices in terms of sourcing, particularly their meats, and subsequently their fresh produce, but I think there's a massive drive towards the meat and the welfare of the animals that they source. I would say that they're probably top of the agenda. But then, you know, you'd sort of expect that anyway. I don't have anything to do with the supermarkets in terms of waste not. It's a whole other ball game. So yeah, we'll see. And I'm a bit, to be honest, I'm a bit dubious about the imperfect sort of workings that go on there. So yeah, another conversation.
Thank you very much, though.
So just keeping things close to home again, as Steph touched on there. Do you think there are lots of companies that deliver to your door now, don't they? There's lots of kind of competitors, I suppose, but from a slightly different world. But you know, we're more and more conscious of kind of making more sustainable choices, and there's more options available to us. Is that question one? Is kind of, have Waste Not ever considered adopting a kind of deliver to door model? And question two would be kind of, you know, from a wider perspective, how have things changed, and is the future looking positive from your side of the spectrum?
Home delivery first. No, we are very much B2B rather than B2C. There are a couple of other home delivery wonky veg companies that are doing amazingly well. Their business model is completely different. Mainly, to be honest, the main reason we aren't headed in that direction is because of the carbon footprint. So we piggyback off lorries who are already going or passing by our destinations, and the produce is alongside other produce that would be going there regardless. So in order to do home deliveries, it's putting more vans on the road. It's a whole other level of emissions and getting the veg to where it needs to be. I think that there's room for it. I think the feedback I get anyway would definitely say there's room for it and there's call for it. But if we could work out a way of doing it that's environmentally friendly, I'd probably address it and look into it again. But at the moment, it's because the margins that we make are that much lower than on class 1 produce, the delivery costs at the same time they're not warranted. So if we could work out something with electric vehicles, which might bring that price down and be more environmentally friendly, and then there's the crunch point at which there's enough households taking it, then potentially I'm going to put that there. Okay,
never say never, right?
I love that, thank you. Now I think we've got time for one last question, and it's one of my more favorite questions. If you had to pick one fruit and one veg, what would be your favorite, if you have one?
Okay, vegetable, definitely aubergine. Can't get enough of them, honestly.
Oh, same.
They are just magical. Like, I mean, honestly, I can just rave about aubergines forever. They're so versatile and so yummy. Yeah, I just love them. And fruit, I would say apricots, actually, because my eyes have been opened to a whole world of apricots. Okay, so a farmer we work with, he grows 8 different types of apricots, and I think I've got quite a romantic notion of apricots as well, because we went like strolling amongst the orchards in 30-degree heat, and it's amazing, like munching on these beautiful apricots. I was like, oh yeah, okay,
yeah.
I think apricots, but I'm not sure if it would be the same if I just got, you know, bog standard apricots in my kitchen. So.
No, thank you so much, Jess, and thank you so much for your time today and taking time to speak to us about all things waste not and rescuing fruit and veg surplus. I find it absolutely, truly fascinating world. And everybody watching, we do hope you'll join us next time. Meanwhile, for more information about our programme of discussions, please go to RA Group's website at www.ragroup.co.uk/news to download the broadcast links. Meanwhile, if you have any questions or suggestions about how you can get involved, please do email gavin.goody@ragroup.co.uk.
Anyway, thank you so much, everybody, for joining us today. Have a fantastic afternoon, and we'll see you same time next week, same place. Goodbye.